But the fact is that how we think about God matters. Whether we view God as that man upstairs or as a warrior affects our lives. And so I want to reflect on this psalm briefly by, first of all, giving some explanation in terms of why David describes God as a warrior, and then just a few quick thoughts of application. First of all, David describes God as a warrior, I think, for two main reasons. And the first is that David knows that he has enemies. To have God as a warrior is critical when you know that you have enemies. And David had enemies. David, of course, himself is a warrior, so he understands the life of a warrior. He also had enemies. He had the Philistines, who were his enemies. He had Saul as his enemy. He had also treacherous attacks by his own son and other people who were against him. So David here, as he cries out to the Lord in prayer, recognizes God as a warrior, and that theme resonates with him and with his life. But I think more importantly, David here describes God as a warrior because David knows the story of redemption. He knows that in creation, this powerful God created all things to be subject to him. That he's the great king over this world, and that he will maintain his kingdom over this world no matter what. He also knew of the defection of Satan, that angel of God who defected to darkness and raged against the Lord and created a war, as it were, between God and himself. David knew also, of course, about the broken covenant that which Adam violated along with his wife. And he knew that in that broken covenant and following from that the Lord had promised redemption through war, through battle. He promised a warrior who would come from the seed of the woman, who would engage in a conflict with the serpent and would endure wounds and suffering, but eventually would crush the head of the serpent. The whole story of redemption is couched in terms of war. And of course, as you work through the Bible, you see that God's people go to war as symbols not only of this conflict between light and darkness, but also as God's way of securing a land for his people. You look farther ahead and you see a great battle described at the end times as well, in which we even find ourselves now. So David describes God as a warrior for important reasons. He knows the story of redemption, and he also can resonate with the concept of war. Now, how do those truths apply to us? And of course, to make sense of this psalm and to make sense of the warrior God, you have to see this psalm Christologically. You have to see this psalm being fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And that's what we have, as I mentioned in the first service. In the middle of this psalm, you have a very distinct reference to the ascension of Jesus Christ, where he rises up from the battle victorious. And Paul latches on to verse 18 in Ephesians 4, verse 8, where he quotes a saying of Jesus, "You have ascended on high. You've led captivity captive." So Christ is that warrior who crushed his enemy on the cross and is continuing to draw to himself captives to be part of his kingdom and to do his will, and continues to subject those who are opposed to his will. Now, how do we then respond to this psalm as understanding Christ as the great warrior? Well, there's a few things that are brought out in this psalm. First of all, this psalm in which God is depicted as a warrior should promote within us great joy. As verse 3 says, "But let the righteous be glad. Let them rejoice before God. Yes, let them rejoice exceedingly." We rejoice through conquest. Christ is conquering, and he is restoring to us in his conquest the joy that was stripped away from us in the fall. So we rejoice as we see God as a warrior. Then also we respond by way of worship, as we see in verse 4. Sing to God, sing praises to His name, extol Him who rides on the clouds. We see in God's conquest His great worth, His great strength, His great love, His great willingness to go to war for His people, and indeed to be killed in that battle for His people. His great love promotes then our worship. And then we also respond by way of gratitude for deliverance. Verse 5, the psalmist here, David, describes God as a father of the fatherless, a defender of widows. God defends us. He goes to war to fight for those like widows who are unable to fight for themselves. We're very grateful that Christ was willing to do what He did for our sakes. We respond gratefully. And then we also respond by being peacemakers and peace lovers, because Christ has secured peace through war. And so He's canceled the need then for us to engage in the same kind of warfare that He engages in. Now, yes, the New Testament even does call us to put on spiritual armor and to fight against hosts of darkness. But Christ has accomplished that conquest. He has vanquished His foes. We fight, as it were, through prayer and through love as well. We see these themes in verses 28 through 31. For example, we see the kings bringing presents to Christ. That the idea that there's a submission and a response of peace and acquiescence to the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, that warrior king. And so Psalm 68 does indeed present God in Christ as a warrior, and to us, that's not repugnant. It's not offensive. It's welcome news for those who need a great warrior to fight for us.